This podcast includes explicit content. Listener discretion is advised.
Welcome to the Ersties Podcast Meets. Today we get down to monkey business with the best-selling author of Sex at Dawn, Christopher Ryan. He reveals how our evolutionary past has shaped the sexual dynamics and ways we relate to each other today. As one of the few mammals that have sex not only for reproduction, why are we having sex? Can our primate ancestors tell us if humans are naturally monogamous? And what would life be like if we lived more like bonobos and let the woman rule?
The Ersties Podcast.
Okay, my name's Christopher Ryan. I'm co-author of a book called Sex at Dawn about the prehistoric origins of human sexuality. And I also co-host a podcast called Tangentially Speaking.
Great. Thanks, Chris. We're really happy that you're here with us today. In your book, Sex at Dawn, you debunk the myth that humans are per nature monogamous. Is that right?
Yeah. My wife and I, Casilda Jetta, argue that humans are by nature a sexually promiscuous species.
Cool. When did you start thinking about sex and alternative relationship models and researching on this whole topic?
Well, when did I start thinking about sex? As a child.
Right.
It's hard to remember that. But as far as the origins of the book, I was living in San Francisco with my girlfriend, who was a stripper at the time. And I had read a book about Darwinian theory of human sexuality and human sexual evolution. And my girlfriend had a lot of friends who were in this sort of avant-garde sexual community in San Francisco. And when I explained to them this theory that I had been reading, a lot of these women who were very smart and articulate explained to me that that sounded like a very Victorian male perspective on things. And so thanks to them, I started to question some of the assumptions underlying that theory and the particular authors that I was reading. And I started to discover that they were leaving out a lot of important information. Like, for example, I was reading a lot about chimpanzees, but I wasn't reading anything about bonobos. And this was before bonobos were well known. This was in the late 80s, early 90s. And I thought, what is going on? Why is no one talking about bonobos? They're very interesting and every bit as relevant to humans as chimpanzees are. But because they're female dominant and highly sexually promiscuous, these mainly male authors aren't even mentioning them. And that's not good science. That's more politics than science. And so that sort of started me going and questioning this dominant narrative about the nature of human sexuality. And the more I investigated, the more problems I found in the dominant standard narrative.
So, we finally have a sponsor. And this is none other than Ersties. That's right, the Ersties podcast sponsored by Ersties. Who would have thought it? This means if you want to see what our day job looks like, then head to ersties-podcast.com/Ersties. That's ERSTIES. Check out the video and follow the link and you'll receive 50% off your first month. Please note that the content is 18+. One last time, ersties-podcast.com/Ersties. Click the link, 50% off your first month. And you must be over 18. Now, back to the pot.
So for our listeners that perhaps haven't heard as much about the bonobos because of the chimp situation, could you tell us in a little bit more detail about their behavior?
Yeah, the first thing that's important to understand is that chimps and bonobos are equally related to human beings, and they're by far the most closely related primates to humans. I like to think of them as if chimps and bonobos are twin brothers of mine. So I'm closely related to them, and they're very closely related to each other, almost indistinguishable in physically, but behaviorally they're quite different. Chimps are male dominant, quite violent. There's been warfare, rape, murder, infanticide. All these things have been witnessed in chimps repeatedly. Bonobos, on the other hand, are female dominant and very relaxed, particularly compared to chimpanzees. And no one has ever seen a bonobo kill or rape another bonobo in the wild or in zoos. And they've been studied intensively now for probably 40 or 50 years. So if it were happening, people would have seen it by now. Franz de Waal, who's great primatologist who's studied chimps and bonobos extensively, said that chimps use violence to get sex, but bonobos use sex to avoid violence. So they're sort of mirror images of each other.
So how does that work? So they're going to have an argument, but instead of having an argument, they have sex?
Right. They experience stress when anything stresses out the group. Chimps will fight and resolve the stress with some sort of struggle, and bonobos will have sex. And then, for example, if you throw a packet of food into an enclosure of chimpanzees, it causes stress because they need to figure out who gets what and, how you're going to distribute it. So normally they'll fight, and the dominant males will take over and take the food and share it amongst themselves, and little or nothing will go to the females and the young. Whereas if you throw a packet of food into an enclosure of bonobos, they'll look at the food, and they'll all have sex with each other, and then they'll share the food.
That sounds like a far greater scenario for me.
Yeah.
Do you think that's because they get turned on by the possibility of the fight and the stress, or you think it's an immediate peacemaking?
Well, it seems that sexuality has been co-opted to promote mutually beneficial social behavior among the bonobos, whereas with chimpanzees, it's more of a dominance behavior. Now, it's interesting that chimps, bonobos, and humans all have sex for non-reproductive purposes. So to one extent or another, sexuality has been co-opted and repurposed in all of those species, as well as dolphins. It's very unusual for mammals to have sex when the female cannot get pregnant. And those four mammals are the only ones of hundreds or thousands of species of mammals that have sex when the female cannot get pregnant. And humans are by far the most sexually active of any mammal.
So what are the social functions that we use sex for?
I think in the human species, sex has been co-opted for social purposes. And by social purposes, I mean to establish and maintain complex social networks. This is what humans do better than any other species. We form groups that work together and cooperate. And so sexual intimacy is a way of maintaining those groups and maintaining peace within those groups. If you think about the typical story of human sexuality, where men are very possessive over women and only want to provision their own genetic offspring, that makes no sense in a hunter-gatherer context. It's very clearly a projection of modern morality and economics onto a hunter-gatherer world. When you look at how hunter-gatherers actually live, they share food, they raise children cooperatively. So anything that increases that social cohesion and that reduces the chance of conflict is going to increase our chances of survival as a species. And so sexual possessiveness would work against the interests of the group as a whole. And that's why if you're not worried about whose children are coming from which men, then you don't need to worry about who's having sex with whom.
Right. So then what are the reasons for monogamy? Because this is a very early, contemporary, new thing that obviously, apparently, it's not actually good for society. So why do we have it? Where does it come from?
Well, it may be good for society as society is today in the post-agricultural world. When you have the beginning of private property, which is with agriculture and settled villages, then you start to have the possession of other people, whether through monogamy or through slavery. And you also have economic hierarchies develop, political hierarchies. Hunter-gatherers are very egalitarian, where no one really can tell anyone else what to do. But once you have political hierarchies and private property, then you have people controlling other people's behavior and options. So this is when monogamy arises, when women become the possession of men, and genetic. It's very important to men to know that the children actually are their children genetically because they're inheriting property. So all these things are tied together.
Right. And is this the same moment where we start having sex in private only, like where the sex becomes like a private matter that is not talked about in society, that is not represented or expressed publicly? Does it go hand in hand? Does it have any relationship?
I guess there's a lot more privacy because the nuclear family becomes the primary social unit, and people are living in individual houses rather than, in huts or lean-tos or communal housing. But even in hunter-gatherers, sex is often seen as something private. People often go off by themselves to have sex. They're generally, in my research, I've seen a lot of sort of festival behavior where people will have sex together and switch partners and that sort of thing. But the typical day in, day out sexual behavior does seem to be more private. The couples will go off by themselves.
So wait, so I'm thinking like where does porn come into this equation? Because I'm trying to understand. I would say that porn then maybe is a bit of that festivity on like us rejoicing and watching other people have sex.
Yeah, I would say that's probably one relation of porn because, you find all these festivals, full moon or changing of the seasons and all those sorts of things were often celebrated with some sort of sexual celebration. And also just, porn is an expression of the fact that sex is such an important part of the human psychology. So I think especially in these days where sexuality is shamed and hidden and sort of pathologized, porn is a place for this appetite to be expressed more freely. And it's sort of an outlet, a pressure release valve.
Mm-hmm. We know that you've been called a shame exorcist. Is that right?
Yeah, sometimes. Yeah.
So we're really interested in the shame moment because, we seem to have a lot of sexual desire for things that are considered taboos or that are shameful in society, such as incest, for example, or, say, rape fantasies. So we seem to get turned on by things that are considered bad in society. And what we are wondering is, what comes first? So are we animals and we have the sexual desire because it's natural and society has made it into a taboo? Or do we develop those sexual desires because it's a taboo and because we get turned on the shameful part?
That's an interesting question. I've thought about that a fair bit because if you look at hunter-gatherer societies that don't have this sort of negative attitude towards sexuality, you find like no kink. The sexual expression is pretty conventional.
Wait, really? Wait. I have to digest that. Is it true?
Yeah. Well, there's not a lot of research in this area because anthropologists, they will get ridiculed by their colleagues if they go out, until very recently and want to study specifically kinky behavior among hunter-gatherers. That's not, conventional graduate school research. And also a lot of the information that we got came from missionaries and first contact explorers and people who probably wouldn't have written about this stuff if they saw it. But within what we do have, it appears that there's very little of what we would call kink, like S&M or even homosexuality is unknown in many societies, which strikes me as very strange, given the behavior of bonobos, which is, like I said, there's a lot of same-sex behavior. But it seems like as far as like S&M and that sort of kink, I do think that comes after the taboo. I think that's being turned on by the transgression. And so in societies in which those things aren't considered transgressive, those behaviors don't have that erotic charge.
Okay, wow, that's great. So I have to be thankful, actually, to the church for making me into a kinky slut.
Exactly. I think about that, because it's like this whole shame exorcist thing. It's like, wow, if we take away the shame, then are we also taking away some of the
fun,
the hot? Yeah.
But even not on we were just saying, even not on just a kinky thing, we have it quite commonly among all kinds of relationships. You get people calling each other like, oh, you dirty sluts, or oh, you're going to do that bad thing. Like, it's quite a common sort of game that's played even when it's not among kink communities.
Yeah, exactly. But still, it's the transgression that makes it fun, right?
Yeah.
You dirty slut is
exactly.
like, ooh, I just said that. I shouldn't have said that. And, but if you take away that social condemnation, then it's kind of, there's nothing left. It's interesting.
So, but then our sexual desire is pretty much very shaped through culture, right? So we're much more culture than nature then in that aspect, appears to me.
Desire is.
Like desire is.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, right.
Well, yeah, but see, I think framing it more this than that, in an oppositional way is a problem because, it's like nature provides the gun and culture pulls the trigger. That's, it's like the desire is there because we're Homo sapiens and we're highly erotic primates. How that desire is expressed is shaped by culture and personal experience. So it's like, we're omnivores. We're interested in lots of different kinds of food. And then how that is shaped is specific to your culture and your personal family background.
Interesting. Talking about desire in culture. Earlier we were talking about pornography and how that can be beneficial in sort of expressing the psychology of sex and how helpful that is. But there's a lot of shame around watching porn, which is basically, I guess you could just say, shame around watching other people have sex. So you'll get like relationships where someone wouldn't want to find their partner watching porn because that would be seen as infidelity. I'm wondering what you think about expressions of desire in public. Like, is there something that can be changed there? Should we have like a limit of how much we express like feeling desirous as human beings?
Well, I think it's important to be respectful of other people's sensitivities when we're talking about things being expressed in public. So, I'm cool with people saying, "Hey, I don't want to see other people having sex in public," right? I agree with that. But as far as within a relationship, I think it's absurd that people consider watching porn to be infidelity. To me, that's bordering on a thought crime. What's the difference between me watching someone having sex and me imagining someone having sex? If
right, but that gets blocked as well, doesn't it?
Well, I don't think it does. I think it's like what we said with the taboos, right? It just adds energy to it. So now, I'm thinking of someone else while we're having sex, then that makes it even hotter because if you found out, you'd divorce me and it just turns into a whole mess. Yeah, I think in general, the more on the table and shared these things are within a relationship, the better the people are, better off they'll be.
Right, I think we agree with you there.
Yeah.
Now I'm wondering, so what's with jealousy? Are you ever jealous?
No, I would say I experience insecurity. I think insecurity is unavoidable. Anytime you value something, you worry about losing it. but I don't think that jealousy is the same. Jealousy to me is when you want to have control over someone else's behavior, and when their pleasure is threatening to you, even if you're not going to lose what you have with them.
Cool. Happy to hear. I think I guess like with everything, it's a process, right? So we're learning constantly, and I think that is also one part of the human condition, that we're able to learn and grow, right? And like learn out of our insecurities and our experiences and become better people and better lovers.
Yeah. And that's not to say, I don't advocate any particular approach to relationships as far as polyamory or, open relationships or whatever. I think people should, pursue whatever they're comfortable with. But I think jealousy is weaponizing your own insecurity to control someone else. So I think that's definitely a feeling that's worth examining and trying to grow past.
You talk about sort of things that are influencing like bonobos' behavior, or things also then moving later on, and agriculture and that influencing our behavior and moving us towards monogamy. Do you think there's anything in society now that's going to influence us to have relationships in a certain kind of way? So say we feel more jealousy and more of a need for control, and therefore maybe more of an inclination towards monogamy. Would we, in a more unstable society, feel that more? Like, I'm just thinking with the current climate, like politically and everything, like what is the shape of things now, or do we not know anymore?
Well, it's hard to say where things are going. If we have total social collapse, and find ourselves in sort of a, Mad Max kind of situation, yeah. I suspect that relationships will become more communal. We'll need each other more, we'll need more assistance from one another, and we'll be sharing a lot more. And that will extend to raising kids, to, food, to protection, and probably to sexual partners as well, because we're not going to survive as nuclear families. That's not the natural social unit of our species. The natural unit is a band of 20 to 50 adults and children. So depending what the resources are that are available, those band sizes will adjust, but will be much more interdependent if it comes to that. The sort of stable economic system we have now encourages fragmentation and living in smaller and smaller units. So more people are living alone right now than have ever lived alone in the history of our species. So I think that's, if we have social breakdown, we'll probably become more communal, and that will extend to our sexual relationships as well.
That looks like a good scenario to me. That's optimism right there.
And what about,
we'll also be eating our dogs and cats.
Well, that's, the downside, but
killed that dream for you there, didn't it? What about technology? Is that going to have any influence?
Well, it's already having lots of influence, sure. Dating sites and sex robots and vibrators, all these things are, and pornography, of course, is part of technology. So yeah, they all have effects, different kinds of effects, depending how things work. One thing that's interesting with technology is teledildonics, which is combining the sort of internet control of vibrators and what they called the fuck sheaths or whatever they're called. That apparently someone told me recently, I don't know if this is true, but someone told me that the United States Defense Department is funding a lot of research into this as a way of soldiers staying sexually in touch with their partner back home while they're being deployed to some war. Yeah. So there are lots of ways technology. There's a sex robot brothel opening up in Texas or something I read recently. So yeah, it's very interesting. We'll see where it goes. I kind of feel like the best thing that could happen to keep it human is the collapse of civilization, but that's
Well,
that's my perspective.
coming back to your stripper girlfriend that you said kind of like, open your horizons and made you question the canon that you were learning in academia and so on. Do you think the rise of feminism, of sex-positive feminism, has had a major impact in debunking this like whole monogamy myth and opening up ways and possibilities for many of us to explore, beyond those paradigms?
Yeah, no doubt. I think feminism and also gay rights have been two major influences in opening up, sort of taking control away from this Victorian male perspective on human sexuality. A friend of ours just is publishing a book this week called Untrue. Her name's Wednesday Martin. It's out in the United States. In that book, she's studying and sort of documenting the way female scientists have changed our understanding of human sexuality by, their research looking at things differently. Until the 70s, I believe, humans were thought to be the only mammal in which the female had orgasm. So female orgasm was seen as this anomaly, and it's just a sort of it's like male nipples, that there's really no purpose for it. It's just, a reflection of the male orgasm. So the nervous system is redundant. And then when female women started getting into primatology and studying different apes and monkeys, the women saw that the female apes were having orgasms. They recognized it just by looking at them. And the males never noticed it. So like, that's just a,
Typical.
kind of a, typical, right? Like, oh.
Did you come?
Yeah, exactly. So just having women involved in these fields has really changed our perception of what's going on.
That's a really interesting point. And I guess just female pleasure as a primacy like changes everything. Really, doesn't it? Because lots of these narratives have been that I don't know. Has it always been that like men thought that women have these desires and that's why they've wanted to keep them trapped?
Well, it sort of goes back and forth. Sometimes the story is that women have very little sexual desire and they just sort of are passive receptacles of male desire. But then, every 100 years or so, the story changes. And then it's that, oh no, women are so incredibly ravenous and hungry that we need to control them. There's no one story that we stick to. We keep skipping around.
It's crazy how contradictory actually these stories are, and still they're founding. Even though they're contradictory, we still stick to them so fiercely.
Yeah. Well, and also, female sexuality is confusing for men. I guess for women too. I don't know. Depending on where a woman is in her ovulatory cycle, her behavior and appetites change. The way she'll respond, to different stimuli. Looking at pornography, for example, her body will change depending where she is. If she's ovulating, if she's premenstrual, postmenstrual. So there is a lot of variation within female sexual response, which, may have some relation to this confusing picture that we're always painting.
Wait, so men don't have variation at all?
Not the same, not menstrual, not with the moon.
Interesting. But then naturally, by biology, the women would be more promiscuous if they have different attractions to different people throughout their cycles.
If they lose their shame and can talk about it, then and they're in charge in society, we could have.
Because say if men are like consistent in their attraction,
or it's like a wide scale taboo, and women themselves are a taboo. Does that make sense?
What?
No, carry on. Sorry.
We're losing it here. No, but right? Is that something that one could say? Like that is a logical consequence to me of if women are attracted to different people throughout the month, then they will be necessarily more promiscuous because they will want to have sex
with more people.
Yeah, possibly.
And different kinds of people.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess it depends. Certainly your secondary point, which was that when women are in charge, everybody has more sex. That seems to be true. So, when young men ask me advice on, how to deal with women and stuff, the one thing I always tell them is if you want a world where you have more sex, you need to create a world where women feel comfortable and safe and relaxed, because that's where everybody has more sex. So it's like bonobos. Female bonobos stick together. That's the big difference between bonobos and chimps. The females are separated and the males stick together. And they form coalitions. In the bonobos, the females stick together. So if a male gets out of line and starts being aggressive, all the females will attack him. So he knows, you can't mess with the females because they'll all defend themselves. They'll all join together. And also they're having lots of sex, so the males tend to be pretty relaxed. And so I think it's really important in human society for women to support each other and to be protective and not to get separated and turn on each other. That seems to be the key. And then for men not to be threatened by that, but to understand that if the women are protected and secure, then everybody has a better time.
Nice. I like this.
Yeah.
I like where we're going. Cool. No, that was fantastic. And you picture the perfect future scenario, I think. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Christopher.
All right. Thanks.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
The Earthist Podcast.